Law and order. One of the things that makes Judaism unique and also extraordinarily healthy as a religion is that things are not left up to the individual's understanding or decisions. In other words, to put it biblically, it's not everyone doing what's right in their own eyes. It's not a bunch of chaos and confusion. It's not a situation in Judaism in which every individual Jew just gets to interpret the Bible on their own, based on their own paradigm or their own emotional feelings and so forth. It's not a situation in which the Jew says, this is how God is leading me, or this is what the Spirit has told me, or this is how I understand it. No, in fact, in Judaism, we have what's called halacha. We have Jewish law. We have an established order, an establishment of law and order that we go by. We have what's referred to as minhag, which is customs. And then there are traditions on top of that. But even the traditions and the customs, it's important to note, are established through centuries, if not millennia, and B, they're all based on biblical things. We don't have colored eggs and rabbits, and we don't have weird this or weird that. Everything that we do that's a custom has to do with biblical things. But the most important aspect of this is that it's not left up to the individual's own devices. And as a result, we don't develop a cult atmosphere. One of the things that I have always said about Lapid Judaism, we practice normative Judaism. Everything we do at Lapid is done by Jews all over the world. Pardon me, and has been done by Jews for thousands of years. We're not reinventing the wheel here. I don't look at the Torah, God forbid, and try to come up with Rabbi Griffin or, as an interpretation. This is, and what have you. And we do that for two reasons. Number one, because it's right. Judaism is right. It's not, it doesn't, you don't need to perfect it. It doesn't need to be fixed. And number two, and this is also equally important, it prevents us from being a cult. Yes, which is important. The fact that we, as an example, the fact that we have Erev Shabbat like all other Jews on the planet prevents us from being a cult. The fact that we wrap tefillin the way that we wrap tefillin and we do it halakhically properly, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, prevents us from being a cult. The fact that we have conversions according to halakha, we don't make things up. We don't have Messianic Gentiles and, that type of thing. Again, prevents us from being a cult. The fact that we don't go to a national park or a state park with a Coleman tent and call it a sukkah prevents us from being a cult, you see. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to be. And there's Shoshana Keith. I was just about to say something, and I want to give Shoshana Keith because she blessed me with a new term, and it's an awesome term, and it's a true term, and the term is hippie rooter, and we don't want to be hippie rooters. Okay, we don't want that. All right, so this is good. Now, what does all of this have to do with Yitro? Very interesting. We spoke yesterday. I waxed eloquently yesterday about the juxtaposition of Yitro, one of the two quintessential converts in Judaism, the other being Ruth, and the Torah portion that gives us the law. And so basically the most important event in all of Judaism, which is the giving of the Torah, which makes us who we are. Without the Torah, we're nothing. This is, you can't be God's people if you don't have the Torah. In relative modern Judaism, by the way, there's this idea that if you're an apostate Jew and you're not even practicing Judaism, and maybe you even believe in a different deity, you're still a Jew. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to tell you, how many of you that come from a Christian background remember or believed in or thought about or whatever, the once saved, always saved mentality. Anybody out there comes from that mindset? Well, the once saved, always saved mentality basically said that once you got saved, you could never get unsaved, no matter what you did. Well, of course, that's stupid. All right. We like to just call the Rebbe scene doesn't like it when I'm sorry. I apologize to my wife. That is how we say irrational. Frankly, there's no truth to that. If you just think about it logically, I mean, seriously. Well, on the Jewish side of the fence, the idea that if you're a Jew, you're a Jew no matter what happens, or no matter what decisions or choices you make, is equally foolish. And in fact, not only is it foolish, and this is not my opinion, but as I mentioned, and it's important to pay attention to the words that are coming out of my mouth, that concept is a relatively modern concept. By relatively modern, I mean certainly confined to probably the last 50 years, at best, the last 100 years. Because if you actually study Jewish halacha, Jewish law, you find that if you are an apostate Jew and you reject the covenant, which is the Torah, you are not considered Jewish anymore. In fact, the halakha suggests that Abraham stands at the gates of Gehenna, and when those Jews who have abandoned the Torah go to Gehenna, he will return to them their circumcision. All of this is important, okay? Just want to let you know that, believe that, trust that. So, the most important event in Jewish life is the giving of the Torah. It makes us a people, and that event happens to be named after a convert. And that is no small thing, and it's not accidental. It's on purpose. What we find in today's Aliyah is, Rick, you have a good question. I'm going to come back to that in just a second. What we find in today's Aliyah is the establishment of judges, not just the Sanhedrin, but also the Sanhedrin Katan, and as well as lower courts. There were courts of 7, there was courts of 3 judges, and so forth. But the entire system of judges that we know of and cherish today was actually established by a convert, namely Jethro. So Rick asked an important question here. With no Sanhedrin, who decides matters for current events? Very good question. First of all, let me say unequivocally, because these types of things pass across my desk from time to time. People will send me emails and or links or whatever. Not you guys. Usually it's people I don't know, because y'all are my Jedi Knight students, and you utilize the powers of the Force, and you would just choke somebody out when they sent you that. But all seriousness aside, I'm kidding. But anyway, they say, hey, there's a Sanhedrin being developed in Israel right now, or blah, blah, blah. So let me just say, so you'll know, there is not now, nor has there been since the 1st century, basically, a Sanhedrin. All right. And there won't be a Sanhedrin until the Moshiach returns, maybe sooner or time. All right. So believe that, trust that, know that. So anybody tells you that they're trying to set up a Sanhedrin in Jerusalem, you should, in some of these, there legitimately Jewish groups in Israel who kind of working towards that, maybe, but they're on the fringe. And I can tell you, no one takes them seriously. Please trust me on that. Okay. By the way, little trivia question for you. Many of you know that heritage speaking, my side of the family is from France, or French. Historically, I've lived in the United States my entire life. My family has been in the United States since the 1700s. But prior to them coming to Los Estados, actually, they didn't come to Los Estados Unidos. My ancestors actually came to French Louisiana back in the day. But anyway, as a result, I have an affinity for all things French, to include toast. So, a little trivia question for you. Do you know the famous French leader who attempted to actually establish, and in fact did establish for a very brief period of time, a Sanhedrin? Da, 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 da. Anybody want to answer that question? Famous French leader? Come on, it's too easy. This is so easy. This is for 10 extra points on your Aliyah day final exam, which will take place in Elul. Anybody? Yes, Napoleon. Yes, Napoleon. That is correct, Rick. Napoleon. He actually did establish, or tried, actually did, and I think it lasted like a couple of years, a Sanhedrin in Paris, all made up of Jews. Napoleon was a friend of the Jews, very much so. And you grew up in France, Tamima. That's awesome. Napoleon, that is true. Napoleon also tried to conquer the Holy Land because he wanted to help or cause or what have you, the Jewish people to rebuild the temple. So yeah, I think that's why, Napoleon has a bad name in history. And I think one of the reasons Napoleon has a bad name, based on the study that I've done on him, which has not been exhaustive, but it's been more than most. And that is because Napoleon was so friendly to the Jews, and he liberated Jews. He liberated them from the ghettos when he conquered Italy, for instance. And as a result of that, the monarchs of Europe hated him. They actually made fun of him for being a Jew lover. So it's true, Napoleon. So anyway, enough about Napoleon, but that is true. So going back to Rick's question, there is not a Sanhedrin. So the question is, how do we establish issues today? Two things. Number one, we have the halakha. The halakha that was given from the last Sanhedrin still stands today as valid. This would include the calendar. Please do not ever, for the love of God, for the love of all that's holy in the world, do not ever be tempted to get off the Jewish calendar. That is going to lead you, talk about going off of a cliff. Please don't ever do that. The calendar we have today was established by the final Sanhedrin, and it is valid, it is accurate, it is authoritative, and no other calendar is authoritative, especially when it comes from Gentiles. Do I have to say that? I love Gentiles. I want to see them get saved and become Jews, but please, I'm not going to allow Gentiles to interpret Torah. Is that okay? Yeah, Rick, Napoleon hated the Pope too. That was another thing. But anyway, so as far as having said that, so halakha is halakha, right? But remember this, that not all Orthodox Jewish communities are monolithic. Just having a conversation with a Jewish gentleman last night, in fact, and this topic came up, and he lives in Israel and so forth, and he 100% confirmed what I just told you. It is not monolithic. There is, even though there is a lot of unity within Judaism with respect to halakha, there's also some differences. So please don't think, because I've had people, and usually they're non-Jews who have 5 minutes of experience, and they'll tell me, well, this is what Jews do. And I just laugh, because that's what Jews do in that group. That's what Jews do in that community, but that's not necessarily what all Jews do. It could be or it can't be. So the question, going back to Rick's question, is, what does Judaism do today to kind of figure out these differences? Well, if Jewish group A does this and Jewish group B doesn't do quite that, they're not exactly universes apart, but there are some differences. Who makes those decisions? And the answer is the rabbi. In any and every Jewish community, it is the ultimate decision on what we do as a community, halakhically, minhag-wise, tradition-wise. All of it rests upon the shoulders of the rabbi. It's one of his responsibilities. Or in the case of Hasidic Judaism, the person who's known as the Rebbe, who is the one who's basically over the community. Doesn't mean that the rabbi's a dictator. It doesn't mean that he can just go off the derrick and just make stuff up. But when it comes to these matters of, hey, do we have this custom or that custom? Do we focus on this stringency or that stringency? What about this halakha? How does it apply to us? The question comes back to the rabbi always, 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 always. Okay? That's why when you go on Jewish websites and you're asking questions about how do you do this, how do you do that, typically if the group is worth its salt, at the very end of the article, whatever you're reading about, they will tell you this is what we're telling you. However, you should always ask or consult with your rabbi. Okay. And so, and ladies, this goes for you too. If you have a feminine question that pertains to your femininity, you should ask the Rebbetzin. And she's the final authority, not anybody else. Okay. So when it comes to that type of stuff, so that's how that rolls. But I want to share this with you. By the way, like our channel. We're 15 minutes into this, but please like our channel, or like the video rather. Subscribe to our channel, share it with all your friends, and it's going to be awesome. I want to share this insight with you from Rabbeinu Bachya. Just it's okay. Let me start here. It's talking about how at the end of Parashat Beishalach and going into Parashat Yitro, we have the Battle of Amalek. It's talking about the Battle of Amalek anyway, juxtaposition to all of this. And the insight is essentially saying here that the end game for the final redemption, the prophetic end result. Remember, this comes from Rabbeinu Bachya, so this is not a Christian source. This is a Orthodox source. No, Al, the Enoch calendar is not the best one. The best calendar, the only calendar, is the Hebrew calendar. Please do not go on another calendar. I will throw myself across you and prevent you that from happening. But anyway, so the end game for the final redemption is that the entire world, all of the Gentile peoples, would become Jews. This is very important for you to understand. Okay, a lot of Jews don't get this. I say that a lot of Jewish people said to me, hey, one of the objections to Moshiach being the Messiah is, how can he be the Messiah when he didn't gather in the 12 tribes? And so I explained to them that that's not the job of the suffering Messiah. That's the job of Mashiach ben David. However, how come you're not talking about one of the other messianic roles, which is to gather in all the Gentiles? Yep. That's lost in the sauce, because in modern Judaism, there's this, as I talked about yesterday, this ridiculously absurd idea that we as Jews are not supposed to proselytize. That is the most foolish thing I've ever heard in my entire life. It's completely unbiblical. It's completely out of alignment with Jewish literature. And it's just frankly absurd and absolutely illogical. And as a result of that mentality, we have lost sight of the fact that one of the Mashiach's roles is to gather in the nations, like it says in Isaiah 2:3, like it says in Zechariah 14. So here, and incidentally, how important are converts? Did I mention this? I think I did a second ago. I've talked about many things already, but I talked about the fact that Jethro is associated with the Torah portion in which we receive the Torah, but Jethro is the one who is responsible for establishing the judgments and so forth I just talked about. So all the other thing about Judaism that's as important as the Torah is halakha, which is a word that we say means Jewish law, but in matter of fact, halakha means the way in which we walk. In other words, the word halakha itself literally means how do we walk it out? So what I love about halakha is a lot of people think, well, this is a Jewish law. It's do's and don'ts. No. This is how we live out Torah. By the way, that's what the Talmud is. A lot of people have no clue. In fact, most of the people who talk negatively about the Talmud have never actually seen it or read it. They've only heard about it, like they heard about a unicorn, but they've never seen one. The Talmud is all about, this is what the Torah says. How do we live that out in everyday life? How do we, and by the way, not just how do we as an individual live it out, how do we as a people live it out? And that's the other thing that the rabbi has to consider. When you come to the rabbi and you say, Rabbi, how do we do this? When the rabbi answers you, he's not thinking about just you. Because see, the halakha has to apply to you and everybody else, as well as himself. So when the rabbi gives you an answer and you think, well, that seems a little bit lenient, that's because he's thinking about everybody else and how this is going to affect them, because it's universal. So if the rabbi tells you that this is what you must or must not do, then that has to apply to another family that has different circumstances than yours. And whereas if you want something to be more stringent, well, that may work for you because it's just you and your wife, and it's just, just as an example, it's just the two of you. But what about the family that has 4 kids? How's that going to work for them? You see. And so this is what differentiates Judaism from other cults and religions that basically everybody does what's right in their own eyes, is that when the person making the decision, in this case, the judge, he's thinking about the whole community, because we do things in unity. Hence the word community, right? Dream work makes teams work. This is what it's all about. So anyway, going back to this concept here about the ingathering of the Gentiles, it says that during the exile in which we find ourselves nowadays, we will be helped by the prophet Elijah, a descendant of the tribe of Levi, just like Moses. The second helper will be Moshiach ben Yosef, the redeemer from the tribe of Joseph, like Joshua, who was from the tribe of Ephraim. So it says, just as the first redemption resulted in Yitro converting to Judaism and returning to the fold, so as a result of the final redemption, all the surviving Gentile nations will convert and join Judaism. The reason that the portion of Yitro, which contains the account of the giving of the Torah, also follows the story of the flight of Amalek and Yitro's conversion, is that the report of the giving of the Torah is a reminder that eventually the Torah will become the property of all mankind, and God's name and knowledge of him will be worldwide, like the waters which cover the ocean, Isaiah 11:9. So this is a wonderful insight from Rabbeinu Bachya that says, look, in the end of days, all the nations are going to walk in Torah. This is God's heart. This is God's desire. And we see that in this Torah portion, the giving of the Torah and the establishment of the Jewish courts are all because of Jethro, a convert. This teaches us the importance of the mission of bringing people into the light of Torah. It is a fulfillment of prophecy. People, in the Messianic world, the idea is, we want to get they want to get Jews saved, and basically to become Christians. That's 100% true. Okay, so that's the problem with that, is that it's not biblical. What do you mean it's not biblical? Well, you don't want Jews to become Christians. That's obvious, but that's not even what I'm talking about. We look at the story of Joseph. How did the brothers come to believe in Joseph? Well, if you read the story, it's because a bunch of Messianic Gentile Egyptians went to the brothers and taught them about Joseph being the Messiah, and led them to belief in Joseph and repentance. And that's how the brothers became aware and knowledgeable of Joseph, and that's how they became believers. It was because a bunch of Messianic Gentile Egyptians shared with them the gospel, the epistle to Cairo. Oh, I'm sorry, that's not at all how it happened. That's a misquote. Actually, what happened is that there were no Gentiles who taught the Jews anything. In fact, it was the Jewish people. It was Joseph himself who revealed himself to the brothers. So what did Joseph do? Did Joseph try to reveal himself to his brothers initially? No. What did Joseph do? He set about making converts of Egypt. Did he not? You see this? Do you see the pattern that's unfolded before us? So Jethro establishes law and order. We see that he sees that Moses is trying to decide all of these cases, and this is in chapter 18 and verse 14. that, and well, I'll start reading in verse 13. It says, "It was on the next day that Moses sat to judge the people, and the people stood by Moses from the morning until the evening. And the father-in-law of Moses, who's Jethro, now a Jew, saw everything that he was doing to the people and said, 'What is this thing that you do to the people? Why do you sit alone with all the people standing by from morning to evening?'" Now, isn't it remarkable? Now, listen, Jethro's a smart guy, obviously, but so is Aaron, so is Joshua, so is the 70 elders. How come it takes Jethro to be the one to say, "Hey, I just got converted. We just had the party, the festive meal to celebrate. And by the way, what are you doing, Moses? This is not going to work out well." You know, it's really a remarkable story when you think about it. So it goes on to say, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is talking about why it was Jethro that was the one who really is credited with establishing the Jewish courts. And again, I just want you to let that sink in. The reason we have a Sanhedrin is because, or we will have, and we have had, is because of Jethro. Unbelievable. And we're going to read here in just a second that the Tanakh brings down that Jethro's relatives, his descendants, actually end up sitting on the Sanhedrin eventually. So it says here, Rabbi Shimon ben Bar Yochai observes that the knowledge of this concept of justice had momentarily departed from Moses so that Jethro could have the privilege and the honor of proclaiming it. So he's bringing down that, well, Moses just had a mental lapse, but that was because God wanted Jethro to have the honor. And the reason is thus. No converts ever cherished the Torah as much as Jethro and his descendants. See 1 Chronicles 2:55. For this reason, he was called beloved. He had earned the exceptional privilege of having one of the Torah's most important institutions attributed to his initiative. His name Jethro derives from yeter, extra, and intimates that an entire extra passage was added to the Torah on his account. Unbelievable. Now I want you to think about this, guys and gals. You know, it's interesting to me because you hear Jewish people talk and they're like, well, according to halakha, we're not supposed to proselytize converts. And according to halakha, and you have to do this. And according to halakha, you can't do that. Well, first of all, there's nothing in Jewish law that says we're not supposed to proselytize. Well, I've talked about that at length, but we'll put that aside. The irony is when you start talking about halakha, the reason we have halakha is because of Jethro, a convert. Just in the same way, the reason we have Judaism is because of Abraham, a convert. You see the importance of converts, ladies and gentlemen? They're critical. Without converts, there wouldn't be a King David. Without converts, there wouldn't be a Messiah. I mean, it goes on and on and on. It says here, Jethro goes on to tell him in verse 20, you shall caution them regarding the decrees and the teachings, and you shall make known to them the path in which they should go and the deeds that they should do. Okay? He's talking about the people and the judges in particular. He goes on to say, and you shall discern from among the entire people men of accomplishment, God-fearing men of truth. He's talking about who the judges you should establish. When in the commentary, Rabbi Munk's commentary, it says, you shall make known to them the path in which they should go. It says, this advice follows that of cautioning them concerning the decrees and the teachings. Hence, it implies some supplementary duties. Rabbi Yosef contends that this refers particularly to the duty of the love of a fellow man. This is from the Talmud, Bava Metzia 30b. In fact, he says the path mentioned here is the Derek Etz HaChaim, the way of the tree of life, and the Derek HaShem, the way of HaShem. In both instances, the path leading to God and eternal life is the way of love and love and justice. You need to understand that. Love and justice, a path of morality and good deeds. It includes, visiting the sick, legal matters, things of that nature, charity, moral obligations, burying the dead. And what I wanted to point out again is that all of this comes about, this path of HaShem, this path to the tree of life, all of it comes about because of Jethro. There's an interesting insight in this as well. It talks about here that that throughout Jewish history, it says that converts often have just a greater enthusiasm for the things of God. Rabbi Monk says it's not rare that a Ger Zedek, a righteous convert, feels and gives expression to basic natural sentiments more easily than those who are born Jews. And this is one of the. I remember how I talked about the whole thing in Judaism about we don't want converts or we don't want to go seek converts. That's psychology. It's not theology. And the reason is it is oftentimes subconscious, but sometimes not so subconscious. But the reality is it's at the very least, it is a subconscious jealousy. It's a Jonah syndrome. We know that converts are more enthusiastic. They're more faithful to the truth of Torah and halakha than we are, and therefore we don't want them around us, which doesn't make any sense whatsoever, right? But that's just how human beings are. Well, that's the reason. It's psychology, guys. The reason that you say, well, why don't Jews just have why do Jews, make it so hard for people to go through conversion? Because I've heard this too. I've heard plenty of rabbis and other Jewish groups say, well, conversion is difficult. It really takes a lot of effort. That's the way it's supposed to be. No, it's not. It's not supposed to be that way. And there's no halakha to support that whatsoever. In fact, it's quite to the contrary. Why do they make it difficult? Well, once again, I had a rabbi, it's psychology. It's a jealousy. I had a rabbi tell me, let me tell you what he told me. And then using the Jedi skills that I have taught you, I want you to tell me the problem. Okay, you ready? We're almost done, guys. The class is almost over. I've got one more thing I want to share with you besides this but here we go. I was having lunch one time with an Orthodox rabbi in Dallas, and we had this discussion about converts and what it takes to become a convert from his point of view. And he was telling me that in order for somebody to actually complete conversion in his synagogue, they had to come to know, and I quote, the Shulchan Aruch cold, meaning that they had to be masters of knowledge with respect to the Shulchan Aruch, which the condensed version of the Shulchan Aruch is 5 volumes. Okay. So they have to be masters of it. They have to know it by heart. They have to know it cold. Later on in that same lunch, we talked about the restaurant at which we were eating. And he went on to explain to me how at that very restaurant on Thursday afternoons, he would hold a Shulchan Aruch class for the members of his synagogue. Utilizing your Jedi skills, I want you to tell me what was my immediate thought when I heard that. I want you to utilize your Jedi skills, and I want you to tell me what I was thinking the minute he told me that. Yes, Shoshana Brenner. That is true. The Jewish members of his synagogue didn't know the Shulchan Aruch cold, and therefore he had to have a class on Thursday afternoons. Yet, he required a non-Jew who wanted to become a Jew to know it by heart. Guys, I often talk about my experience in the Marine Corps because A, I'm proud of to be a Marine, and it was very, and B, the more important reason is it was so impactful to me. But one of the things that the Marine Corps is really, 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 really super big on, and that is leadership. And as it relates to leadership, what all of my instructors, whether it was in boot camp or later on in other things, and even leadership in the fleet, one of the things the Marine Corps is really big on is that a leader will never, ever, a Marine leader will never ask you to do something they themselves are not willing to do or aren't presently doing. That is super huge, and that is critically important in the mindset of a Marine to the integrity of leadership. And therefore, if you have a rabbi who's saying that if you're going to be a convert, you have to know the Shulchan Aruch cold, but yet the Jews in my synagogue don't, then that is a colossal failure of leadership. And it is a leader and a group of people who lack integrity. Because if I don't know the Shulchan Aruch cold, then how can I expect you to know it cold? Because frankly, if you think about it, if you actually are a convert in his synagogue and you actually have made it through that crucible of conversion, in which you do in fact have to know the Shulchan Aruch by heart, then you would be the one teaching the class on Thursday to all of us who don't know it. Selah. Last thing I want to tell you is talks about here in the notes how the importance of halakha. And the reason that halakha is so important is because it's an aspect of justice. It talks here about the cult of love, and that some religions have a cult of love. God is love, but they forget that God is a God of justice. And a cult of love will never lead us to truth. It will lead us, in fact, to sin. And that's what we've seen. We have seen the cult of love. It is alive and well. And it has led to debauchery. It has led to sin. We have to understand that God is a God of justice. And this is why halakha is important. He is a God of mercy, absolutely. But he's also a God of justice. And too many people have forgotten that to their detriment. End of our Aliyah today. Thank you so much for being with me. We're going to be back tomorrow. And tomorrow we get to be in one of my most favorite portions of scripture, which is Exodus 19, the precursor to the giving of the Torah. And there we learn about being a kingdom of priests. It's going to be wonderful. I look forward to you being here with me tomorrow. Until then, have a beautiful and blessed day. May God give you the desires of your heart. Please like the video, comment on it. Let me know your opinion. Let me know your thoughts. And that is always a blessing. Thank you so much. Shalom Aleichem. Look forward to seeing you in the morning.